think we all know by now that it's the cheaper cuts of meat that have the most juiciness and the most flavour. And in this episode, we're going to elevate them to a whole new dinner party status by adding a few new twists and a whole lot of love. Seldom served, but utterly delicious and immensely forgiving is slow roast pork neck. This one I'm stuffing with apples and sage. You're going to need a hefty butterflied pork neck, onions, garlic, celery and some apples, chicken stock and cider and some baby leeks, sage, bay leaves, salt and pepper. Pork neck is one of those things that very often isn't roasted. You usually sort of find in pork neck chops that you toss on the braai or put into stews. But actually, as a roast, as a whole roast, absolutely delicious. I'm going to start by making a stuffing of sorts, really. And we're going to use that sort of rolled inside the pork. So to that end, I want to pop the pan on. Good glug of oil. I've got some Sunning cold pressed canola oil here. I think some garlic won't go amiss. I think just some slices will be all right. Right, pop that over there. Let's see. You must cut your onion quite fine because it is going to cook away, but you do want it sort of as part of a stuffing, so you don't want sort of big pieces. And then I've got some celery. Now, not a lot of celery, but I just think that sort of onion, celery and apple make for good sort of old-fashioned flavours, really. I'm going to use a few of the celery leaves because that's where the sort of pungency is. So I'll toss that in there. And actually, you can pop the stalks just into the pan so it can slowly sort of fry away. Grab a wooden spoon and just stir that about a bit. But then I've got apple. I've peeled them. I mean, you don't strictly need to, but I do think pieces of apple skin won't be delicious in what is essentially a stuffing. I mean, it's also a great place to use apples that are sort of past their prime, because once they're cooked, no one's really going to know. You want the onions to have softened sufficiently before you add the apples. So the stuffing is going to cook some more in the oven, but you want to give it the best start you can. I just toss in the apples and all the celery leaves. They're just more delicate, so I thought I'd add them slightly later. I'm also going to add some sage. You can just chop it all up. It does need a bit of cooking, sage, because otherwise it's a little bit, sort of musty and leathery. The leaves are slightly leathery. If you need a little moisture, I recommend a little bit of cider. But if cider's not your thing, a little bit of chicken stock will do fine, or some verjuice. You know, it's the juice of the unfermented green grapes. Very delicious, but no alcohol. Bit of salt and some pepper. Lovely. Slightly reminds me of my granny, pork and apple. She used to make her own homemade apple sauce, which, you know, in the beginning sort of looked slightly like this. Fab. Just going to turn that down so that it just simmers kind of slowly. And then I'm going to get this rather enormous piece of pork neck. The lovely, lovely thing about pork neck is it's very, very forgiving in that it's quite sort of fatty, and so you can cook it long and slow and you won't overcook it. It'll always be juicy and divine. Well, I'm just going to lay a whole lot of string and then pop my pork on top of it. And then you can just sort of pull them into place. Right, open that up. And then I think a good amount of seasoning never goes amiss. And some pepper. Sure, this is a lovely, lovely piece of meat. Let's just check on this. This looks great. So it doesn't have to sort of melt it away, because as I say, it's just going to spend a good 1.5 to 2 hours in the oven, slowly cooking. So I'm just going to spoon this to the pork. As I said, you know, if you want to make this early and let it cool, that's absolutely fine. But because I'm literally about to pop it into the oven, I'm not actually going to bother with that whole thing. That'll do, I think. Marvellous. Let's see. Lovely. Yeah, you see, it's that lovely little bit of sweetness. It is rather jolly. And you sort of truss it up. Little bows are the best way to do it, I find, because it's just easy that way. And if some of it oozes out, don't worry. And that'll do. Last one. Right. Get a roasting pan. I like to lay some leeks in the bottom. These are just baby leeks. You could just use big leeks as well. Not strictly necessary, but again, sort of the leeks and the pork and the apple, they're all quite traditional flavors, and they really go well together. So pop that on there. I'm going to add the rest of the cider that we used some in the pan, because waste not, want not. Of course, you could just drink it, but, you know. And then, because this is a long, slow cook, you want to have quite a lot of moisture. I'm going to add sort of a cup or so of stock. Then we'll season the top so it looks delicious. Bit of salt. And then, because we don't want to waste anything and because it's going to be completely delicious, we're going to put all this delicious leftover. So if you can't fit your stuffing inside your meat, you may as well just add it to the gravy. Just stir that about. It's got beautiful, beautiful flavors and the sage and all the loveliness. So, waste not, want not, as I'm so fond of saying. Then grab a large piece of foil. That whole shiny side in thing apparently is a fallacy, who knew? Wrap it up, and then put it in a sort of 170, 180 degree oven, as I say, about an hour and a half. When you take it out of the oven, cover it with foil and rest it for at least 15 minutes. It'll make the world of difference. This really is one of my go-to winter roasts. It's impossible to overcook, so it makes for stress-free entertaining. Everyone always loves it.